Namo tassa bhagavato harahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. Okay, so this moon, I've chosen these Attaloka Dhamma, these 8 worldly conditions, concerns, winds, fortunes, vicissitudes. It's the ups and downs of life. I mean, that's basically what it is. Yeah, I'll try and take these off, I think. So this is what the Buddha says. Gain obsesses the mind, and loss obsesses the mind. Fame obsesses the mind, and disrepute obsesses the mind. Blame obsesses the mind, and praise obsesses the mind. Pleasure obsesses the mind, and pain obsesses the mind. They are attracted to gain and repelled by loss. They are attracted to fame and repelled by disrepute. They are attracted to praise and repelled by blame. They are attracted to pleasure and repelled by pain. Thus involved with attraction and repulsion, they are not freed from birth, from old age and death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and anguish. They are not freed from suffering, I say. So that's the 8 worldly conditions. Now, when we look at those conditions, you can see that they all arise out of a notion of a self. It's me that's blamed, it's me that's praised, etc., etc. And when we do that, of course, it just creates mental turbulence. When this happens at a societal level, then you can see communities being split, as we see these days. And of course, when it gets to an international level, well, there's always war. So what's it like to be freed of these worldly concerns? So in the discourse on the greatest blessings, the Buddha has stated how an awakened arahat, how somebody who's fully liberated, is unmoved by one of the 8 worldly conditions. And he describes this as one of the great blessings. And it says that a mind unshaken by worldly vicissitudes, sorrowless, stainless, and secure, this is the greatest blessing. And again, we can extend that to families and countries, and we might just get to a peaceful world. So what I've done is I've just made up questions around these 8 factors, just to give some idea of how we can use them, just to reflect on the way we are with these fortunes and misfortunes. So if we take gain, for instance, is to ask ourselves, what am I obsessing about? What sort of an accumulation am I gathering? What collections do I have? Wealth, power. Even though we might not have much wealth at all, or indeed hardly any power, the point is this obsession about it. Control. How much energy do we give to it? You see? And how much time do we waste brooding and planning over these sorts of things? And then once we can bring a past event to mind as a practice, we can get in touch with that feeling, that craving, that holding on, the cramped grip. So what does that feel like? And to try and separate that from what you might call just an ordinary wholesome desire. I mean, we need money, we need friends, etc., etc. But there's a way of having that without that obsessiveness. And then, of course, there's loss, and everybody fears that. You might lose your job. What does that feel like? If you have lost your job in the past, how did that feel? The despair, the confusion, the anxiety, panic. So much depends upon our work, and the wage that we have. And then there's this self-worth that we have from our work, the sense of status, but we'll come to that a bit later. So we have to just ask ourselves, what if I let go of that? What if I just let go of the obsessiveness and just be more content with what I have? And by going to a past occasion and investigating it and reflecting on it, it just helps us to be prepared for the next time. Huh? So we're not so shocked when we lose things, lose our work, lose money on the horses and stuff like that. So the next one is praise. So again, we look back and we think, well, what have I done or said, or I am doing or saying, which has an underlying demand for praise, for admiration, for compliments, for appreciation? I mean, how does that feel? Is it necessary? You know, and how does that reflect on ourselves and how we're judging ourselves and how we feel embarrassed when we suddenly realize that we've said something or done something just to be praised, just to be admired. And what would have happened if you hadn't had that intention in that particular case? And what should the attitude have been, right? When it comes to blame, well, nobody likes that. Nobody likes to be blamed for anything. And again, to bring up an occasion in the past where we've been blamed and we've been judged and we've been criticized, and just to get to the hurt of that and how we reacted. And sometimes, of course, we react silently within ourselves. We spend hours getting our own back in these fantasies, throwing people on fires and chucking them off bridges and things like that. So it's getting in touch with those feelings and naming them for what they are, you see. So what is it like to be humiliated? See, instead of hiding that from ourselves, suppressing it because of our pride, is to let it up, you see, to let it up and just feel it. And to know that if I can just allow these things to manifest, they're actually dying out. They're actually curing, right? And some of these things are very difficult, the hurt, the humiliation it really hurts the ego. I mean, it really punches the self. And if we're afraid of criticism, does that make us timid? Yeah. Does that make us timid? And then when we have been blamed and it has been our fault, have we been humble enough to accept that, and try and do something about it and not let that rumble on afterwards about self criticism? I'm such a fool, I'm an idiot. How could I have done that? See? It's just being able to let go of something. And then we have the area of success and failure. So again, it's much the same thing. You bring to mind a past occasion when you feel you've been successful, a job well done, and there's nothing wrong with appropriate congratulations. But again, it's this business of hanging on to that success. I've got here just what the Buddha says about somebody who becomes an arahat. Um, he says that someone who's an arahat with their taints are the roots of all our defilements. Craving, a craving for pleasure, craving to become, and ignorance, the basic ignorance of self. And these are the roots from which all these defilements arise. So he says, when those are destroyed and has lived the holy life, done what has to be done, or had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the goal, destroyed the fetters of becoming, and is completely liberated through final desire. So you can see, I mean, it's that sense of completion. What had to be done has been done. And if you look at your life where you've really sort of completed something, it's done, it's finished, it's gone. There's a sense of joy about that, yeah? And laid down the burden. The sense of relief of laying down the burden, laying down the burden of being a human being, basically. And of course, the taste of Nibbana is the joy of freedom, right? So that's where we're heading. It's good to remind ourselves about that. And then, of course, when we are praised, we tend to personalize things. So immediately, it's not the job that's being praised; it's me, right? I'm amazing, right? And you get very big headed. And sometimes, if you catch yourself like that, if you catch yourself being big-headed, and full of self-praise and all that, uh, then again becomes a sort of and you sort of notice that other people are seeing it as big-headedness, and of course that again produces a sense of shame within us. So all these things, you see, just recognize all the ego stuff as unnecessary evaluation tags. Just let them fade away, and eventually, as the Buddha said, they just fall off. Failure. So that's the next one. Failure. So a job didn't turn out well. A relationship sadly ended. How does it feel, not to achieve something, even if you've put a lot of work into it and it just hasn't happened. So again, you get this personalization. The job failed, therefore I'm a failure. Yeah. The relationship failed, so I'm unlovable, right? And it's sort of reflecting on that and recognizing that those personalization of things are just not necessary. They just add suffering to it. And if it was a genuine mistake or whatever, we can be realistic about it, and to make sure that we don't repeat that same mistake. But then again, of course, circumstances change. We don't have that total control. And finally, there's pleasure and pain. So pleasure, of course, both mental and physical pleasure. Um, we're always seeking that. We're always trying to be in that sort of pleasurable state. Um, but it's a case of again not attaching to it, not making it something that is repeatable. So when we have something joyful, something pleasant, to accept that it's come to an end and there's no need to go any further with it. Um, and to find out how we experience desire. So sometimes, for instance, when it comes to food, you don't feel hungry, so you're not attracted so much to the cake. But sometimes when you are hungry, you can't stop yourself from eating the whole cake. So there's something about desire which is separate from seeing something that is pleasant, right? There's that movement towards it of wanting, wanting, wanting. And then to make that distinction between the desire and the action. So remember, in Buddhist psychology, this is really crucial, because when something is a desire, nothing's actually happened. It's just potential. But as soon as you decide to let that energy go and produce something, a thought, speech, something that you do, then it becomes an action. And that action goes out into a matrix of relationships on the outside, but it's also moves into the inner matrix of our psyche. Yeah? And that's what we mean by karma, action. And so we're trying to make a distinction here between indulgence and enjoyment. And we do that, and the Buddha's always on about this, by restraining ourselves, right? And that's very difficult in our society. We're not expected to restrain. In fact, everybody wants us to indulge. But the act of restraint gets us in touch with the unacceptable level, you might say, from a Dharma point of view of desire, right? So in other words, nothing's wrong with appetite, everything's wrong with greed. And then finally, pain. So pain can be very difficult. And I think one of the things we have to be careful of here is that we don't take what pain comes to us as some sort of karmic resolve. I deserve the pain. Uh, we're not in charge of the body, and the body has its own weaknesses. And sometimes when the pain comes, it's to do with genetics. It's not to do with the person themselves. So it's up to us to decide whether this pain is something that I want to work with, So you're working with it in terms of getting that right relationship with pain, of patience, understanding what pain is at different levels. At one level, at the basic level of contact, pain is just sensation, right? It's when it becomes a feeling, when it's acknowledged as a feeling, that you get the sense of pain. And then you get that reaction of not wanting it. But if you can't do that sort of investigation and you haven't got the patience for it, then take an aspirin, do something. I was just thinking then of the Act of Parliament that we've had. Well, it's not completely passed, about assisted dying. You see, and it's an area which Buddhists have to really think about, and where they are personally with that. And when pain gets to a point which cannot be assuaged by any of the morphines and all that sort of stuff, then one has to decide for oneself whether it's a time to put an end to one's life and whatnot. And there are various degrees of understanding as to what is right and what is wrong, but ultimately it's the individual. It's for them to feel okay with it. Yeah. So that's a big topic, that. Yeah. So again, going back to the Buddha and just giving him a bit of time to quote there. Here we go. So when gain arises for an uninstructed run-of-the-mill person, they do not reflect, gain has arisen for me, it is inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. They do not discern it as it has come to be. So that's what's missing. We presume that once I've got something, it's just going to grow, that it's not going to leave me. But it's a good thing to be able to remind oneself that whatever I have received, which is bringing me joy, pleasure, etc., this too will pass. So one of the things I try to remind people to do is that after lunch, to say to yourself, well, this is one less lunch in this lifetime. We can measure our lives by how many lunches we have, how many breakfasts we have. And then those people who are not instructed, you see, they welcome, they sort of grab hold of an arisen gain and rebel against an arisen loss. And so it's the same with status and disgrace, with praise and blame, and with pleasure and pain. As they are thus engaged in welcoming and rebelling, they are not released from birth, aging, and death, from sorrows, lamentations, pain, distresses, and despairs. They are not released, I tell you, from suffering and unhappiness. And of course, those who are awakened, those who have developed to some degree, then of course they don't welcome it in that sense of wanting to indulge it. They just receive it. And this is the difference, he says, the distinction. This is the distinguishing factor between a well-instructed disciple of the noble ones and an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person. So what's this underlying attitude that we're trying to develop to all these worldly conditions? It's equanimity. Yeah, it's equanimity. And this comes about more and more as identity becomes about a self becomes less and less. The less we personalize things, the more we find ourselves at ease with the way things are. And it's this sense of self which is producing all the problems. And we undermine that by reminding ourselves what the correct, or should we say, the more wholesome, skillful attitude ought to be. And it's what do they say? It's a work in process. I wouldn't talk about progress. So you don't get involved with progress. Just get involved with process. How do I, get rid of these wrong attitudes that I have to these 8 worldly winds, which are going to happen anyway by life? We're not going to stop it. So it's one of the attractions of the Buddha's teachings that he really is also, buried his teachings as well into daily life. So it's not just meditation and beautiful mental states and developing metta from the heart. It's actually driving us into right action, right? Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And one of the things we have to do is just be able to handle these 8 worldly winds. Very good. I hope that these words have been of some assistance. They have not caused confusion, and that by your careful investigation of these 8 worldly winds, you will soon be liberated from all suffering, sooner rather than later.